Aloha, friends, coming at you today from Wilson, North Carolina. And I thought today we would talk about levels of awakening that lead up to self realization. And the thing to get a hold of is that during everything prior to self realization is still egoic. Until you self realize or realize the true self, then it's all still the process of coming out of the ego identity. And so all the levels of awakening that are prior to self-realization are still egoic. So, and I've been pondering, I'm going to tell you something right here. I've been pondering for a while, trying to allow this to establish itself within. And it just takes time, I suppose, for it to do so, because it's not easy for the mind. Well, none of this is easy for the mind because all this is beyond the mind. And so in essence, what's happening is the mind is grabbing hold, let us say, of things that are beyond it and pulling them down to its level. Which I suppose works to some degree, but at the same time, if you're back in your mind, then you're back in your ego. And the whole point of enlightenment and self-realization is to come out of that identity, to no longer identify as anything that the ego identifies as, and it has many, many, many things it identifies as. Human, person, persona, careers, skills, male, female, white, black, this gender, that gender. All of that stuff is the ego still. And so here's the thing I was going to tell you. That's hard to get established within. Is that when your first level, or let us say your first awakening is you waking up in the dream. Another way to say that is you wake up to the fact that you're dreaming. Maybe wake up's not the best word because it's confusing. We're talking about sleeping and dreaming and all this. So let us say your awareness. You become aware that you're dreaming, or you become aware that you're in the dream or in a dream. And what that entails and what that is is coming to the realization that this thing called ego, this thing called persona, this thing called person is in its dream. And in its dream, it's going through all kinds of motions, having all kinds of emotions, having all kinds of dramas, having all kinds of ups and downs. It's encountering all kinds of different words and symbols and labels which have their meanings to the ego. Right? And so your realization is that all of that stuff is not you. None of that stuff is you. You are the one observing all of that stuff. You are the perceiver. Perceiving all of that stuff. So your next level, and I would say probably your final level of realization, self-realization, is waking up from the dream. So if you've woken up to the first level, then you're in the dream. You've woken up to the fact that you're in the dream, that you are dreaming. Or you've become aware that you are dreaming. And maybe I should digress a little bit about dreaming. Of course, I'm not talking about that you're asleep, laying in your bed right now having a dream, although that kind of dreaming is actually very similar to this external dream that we call living. So living as an ego is dreaming. That is dreaming. That is what dreaming is. Because again, you're a caricature. I'm talking about ego now. It's a caricature going through all these motions, having all these encounters and experiences, etc., etc. Just exactly like when you're in a dream, meaning when you're asleep at night in your bed. All right, so this is a waking dream, if you will. This is one that you didn't have to go to sleep to have, because the thing that's sleeping is this awareness I'm talking about. The thing that's sleeping is this perception. And as it's awakening, it begins to observe the character that's in the dream and realize, well, I'm not that character that's in the dream, actually. But I am witnessing that character in the dream that I formerly thought was myself, that I formerly identified as myself. Okay, so now we're getting on down the road, let us say, to self-realization, to where you're going to wake up from the dream completely, and you will no longer be dreaming. And basically what that means is you will no longer have any identity in the ego self. You will be what you always have been, but just became unaware of. See, the thing that you become in self-realization is not some new thing. Meaning, it's the you that you become in self-realization is there now, is already within you now. Just like your natural state of being is there now, is within you now. Now you may not be experiencing it. And see, this is what it all comes down to, is your awareness, your perception. So in other words, if your perception has been distracted back onto the ego self, then you have lost sight of your true identity, and you have disconnected from your natural state, your natural state of being. And again, this natural state of being is balanced, harmonious, blissful, and I'm going to say blissful instead of happy, because blissful, I believe, is, it's something different than happy. Happy and sad are both still in duality. They're choices, right? But bliss is not really, it's not a dualistic thing. It's not a dualistic choice that you make. Bliss is, let us say, the purest form of happiness would be bliss, and it's beyond duality. And so that is your natural state. In other words, to sum it all up, all that kind of stuff would just be to say your natural state of being is prior to duality. So any dualistic stuff that you could think of, opposites, choices, right? That's all part of the ego. But the true self, the self that you will realize you always have been and are, even at this moment, even if you're not experiencing it, because again, your awareness has been pulled from this state of knowing, from this state of bliss and harmony and balance, from the unified self that is one with everything, because everything is one, because it's all interconnected, so on and so forth. So waking up from the dream. See, right now, 99% of the people hearing this, whether now or in the future or whenever, 99% of you, if you think that you are awakened, or you're in the process of awakening, you have awoken in the dream. And that's fine. There's no judgment here about any of this. Is all part of the process. This is all just how it works. But you have woken up in the dream, which is great, because how many people are out there that have no idea that they're in a dream? They have no idea that the person they believe themselves to be is a caricature in a dream. So when you wake up to the fact that there's a difference between the you that you thought you were, that is the character in the dream, and the one observing the dream, the one thinking about the dream, the one looking at the person in the dream. And that's probably where you're at. That's probably where most people are at. And you're headed towards self-realization. And when you finally manifest it, let us say, or you finally surrender. This is a surrendering. This is not, well, I'm not going to go through all the things that the mind might think that it is. Again, that's ego. It's the egoic mind trying to grasp what is beyond it. So when you become self-realized, you will wake up from the dream. You will no longer identify as the character in the dream. You will no longer identify as the self that you thought you were before you came to understand all this. Right? And when that happens, your world changes greatly, because now all the things that you, let us say, used to be interested in, who's the you that was interested in it, right? It was the ego. It was the ego self. And it could be interested in just a massive range of things, right? It could be interested in playing the piano and being a great pianist, all the way down the spectrum to it could be interested in sickness and disease and constantly fooling around with being sick and searching for remedies and spending tons of time researching about health products and doing the fitness regime and making sure the calories are then blah 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 blah. What is it? Ego. What is it trying to preserve? It's trying to preserve what it thinks is itself, and namely, that would be the body and the mind. So see, the ego's interests can vary greatly, but when you self-realize, you will drop all that kind of interest. You may not see, self-realization may not actually be for you, at least in this lifetime, or at least at this time. Because when this happens, you will lose so much interest in this external world that you may be perceived as a very boring person. You may be, by others, you may be perceived by others to be, somebody that doesn't want to do much. You may just want to sit amongst the trees and watch the squirrels and just become friends with squirrels. Again, now I've come to what I've done, or where I am. Right? I don't have all these interests and aspirations and goals and all this stuff, because I no longer identify as the ego self. So I've got nothing to prove to anybody. I don't want to get caught up in anybody's drama. I don't need tons of friends to boost my self-esteem and all that kind of stuff, because again, it's all egoic. My phone's overheating. Shoot.